In this tutorial, we're going to look at protozoan diseases, protozoan pathogens. Protozoans, as organisms, are single-celled organisms. These, in this case, there are many single-celled organisms called protozoans, many of which are non-pathogenic, many of which live quite happily in your gut and serve a symbiotically good purpose. But there are also a number of pathogenic protozoans that cause terrible loss to human life and other life across the planet. Perhaps the most well-known one is the parasite that causes malaria, Plasmodium falciparum. You can see some diagrams of the various forms that this particular protozoan takes. So Plasmodium falciparum, and it exists in a number of different forms in its life cycle. This photo here shows the one stage of the Plasmodium destroying a red blood cell and then getting ready to leave the red blood cell, and we'll see this in the life cycle shortly. Another common protozoan is Giardia, which is a waterborne parasite which can cause long-term dysentery and diarrhea and other effects on the gastrointestinal system. So this is Giardia down here, and quite a persistent infection, quite difficult to remove. Let's have a look at the life cycle of Plasmodium, which causes malaria. Now, malaria is responsible for millions of deaths around the world every year. Rather horrible deaths that result after an extreme cycle of fevers, and a somewhat complex life cycle is involved in the Plasmodium transmission from host to host, and of course involves a very famous vector, which of course is the female of the Anopheles species of mosquito. So the mosquito is a vector that carries one form of Plasmodium in its body, and then it injects that form of the protozoan into another host animal, say a human being or another animal. So here we have the mosquito in a normal feeding cycle, injecting the sporozoites form of the Plasmodium into the bloodstream. These get into the capillary, transmitted by the bloodstream around the body, and eventually settle in liver cells in the human being, where they become the merozoite stage of the Plasmodium parasite. These are released from the liver, and eventually these merozoites infect red blood cells and then go about asexual reproduction in the red blood cells to produce gametocytes, which are male and female sex cells, which then carry out a sexual part of the life cycle after they're absorbed back into a mosquito, after being sucked up by a mosquito. These gametocytes confuse sexually to form more sporozoites, and then so on and so on. So here we see this continual cycle that involves a vector and host cells. Treatment of diseases such as malaria are difficult and often involve several different strategies to defeat the disease. A cure for the malaria parasite is still being sought, and prevention in this case is better than cure of the disease. One of the common treatments of the malarial parasite is the ingestion or taking in of a chemical called quinine. Quinine is a natural compound chemical that's capable of killing the parasite in its early stages. But interestingly, quinine, the parasites became resistant to quinine, and various versions of this became available to keep conquering the resistance. And there are other drugs now in the market that help to break the cycle. So if you are planning to travel into an infected region, a region where you're likely to be infected with malaria, you would be advised to start taking anti-malarial tablets anything up to 2 or 3 weeks before you travel, during travel, and often for 2 or 3 weeks after you come home, to ensure that any of the protozoans that get into your body are killed. So that's one approach. The other approach would be to somehow interfere with the vector life cycle, so interfere somehow with mosquito transmission of the disease. So obvious things like mosquito nets over beds at night to prevent being bitten. Repellents would be an obvious one. Spraying with insecticides in mosquito areas to help reduce the numbers of mosquitoes. The removal of swamps and bogs, places where mosquitoes breed rapidly and in huge numbers. So all of these are ways of managing the vector aspect of the life cycle. If you can break the vector aspect, then Plasmodium transmission between hosts is reduced. So these are some of the ways that are being tackled at the moment. I think it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in America is spending billions of dollars at the moment trying to seek a cure for malaria, since it affects so many millions of people around the world every year.